Hi, my name is Faye Bentley. This is my TP3 for my second observation, which was at the youth group that I run called Sound. The session was on language and gender stereotypes. The group is an LGBT youth club called Sound. We meet on a Tuesday in Keighley, and the group is made up of young people that are trans, or lesbian, gay, or bisexual, or questioning that, or friends of those people. Um, I've been running the group since November last year. Previous to that, the Kelly, who I run the group with, ran it a year before that, and in between was just really inconsistent with staff. So Abina, who is the worker in that area, asked if we could come and run it again, and both of us said yeah. Both of us are from a youth work background, so the group, although we always do issue-based work or a talks, like a talk session, it's very informal and based upon the principles of youth work. Obviously, we always have a session plan. It always runs as it would in a classroom. It's just a very informal environment. So obviously the principles of youth work are always used within that. Um, I I find that building relationships is one of the most important things for me, and I know that the group trust us and are very open and honest with us and feel that they can ask questions. So I wanted to draw upon this within that observation, especially after the observation before. My first observation in this second year, which I felt was a little bit of a disaster. I didn't feel that it gave me in a very good light, and I know that from last year, from the first year, that my observations were really good, and that my classroom management and my behaviour management and my relationships is one of my strongest points. And I feel that my equality and diversity and my planning in terms of differentiation is really key to my sessions, and that's what that's sort of my building block and my starting point, which again are very much the principles and practices of youth work. Somehow I want to be able to switch that and put that into teaching. So I try to think about that and think about my individual learners, and I know that doesn't always come across in my lesson plans. And I find the lesson planning quite difficult. Not necessarily what I'm going to do, but the actual written part of the lesson plan I think is quite difficult. I really love working with this group of young people, and I think that was there in that observation. The group are all at very different points and have very different levels of knowledge, which is where the differentiation came in. And I wanted to be able to draw upon that and do some building. So I looked at things like Vygotsky's scaffolding, which I know is quite a simple tool, or a simple sort of learning theory, but I think that's one that's really important within this group, that they learn from one another, and that as a worker I have that ability to be able to step back, which is always really important in all my talk sessions or any session that I'm in, that once that discussion's generated, that I can step back and I can make that I can enable that learning to go on between the group, which I try very much to use that sort of idea of that they're a group and that they're a community and that they can learn from one another. I felt that the session went really well. There was lots of discussions generated. I could see some obvious learning going on. There was one young person that was specifically asking lots and lots of different questions, and although pretended he doesn't necessarily know, did really well and really grasped the understanding and everything else about that session. I sometimes feel that I'm really good at questioning, and I'm really good at the really informal way of drawing out their individual learning and the group's learning. But sometimes I struggle to put that into words. And I always like, so I'm constantly asking questions and constantly challenging the views and constantly asking, I'm trying to find out what they've done, which again is one of my strengths, being able to pull that information out. But sometimes what I struggle with is how I map that and how I measure that distance travelled. So I think that's something that I'm going to try and focus on for my next observation. So I'll look at that in a little bit more detail. I I do think there was some stretch and challenge within that session, but I think that could be taken to that next step. Like I said, because the group was so diverse, I knew that I needed to think about how I was going to differentiate and include that stretch and challenge for some of the more, I suppose, able members of the group, so knowledgeable members of the group. There's a couple of young people that have got learning difficulties. There's a young lady with Asperger's, and then there's a young man with, I suppose, on his consent form it's not there, but there is some definite learning difficulties and also some mobility. There's something wrong with one of his eyes, which really does impact on whether he can use his fingers. So I wanted to generate some discussion, so I used pictures to be able to do that, as well as some words and some definitions. Now, most of the kids are okay with reading, and a lot of the young people can, maybe the weaker ones, the more able ones will help, and I always try and introduce all that. um I think that the group were they really like me and Kelly that run it, so there's always a lot of trust. So I think that this session went really I think it went really well because of that, as well as the fact that it was really well planned, really well thought out, and really well differentiated, um, and that there was a lot of learning that went on in that. It went on a lot of learning went on in it. um, I think that they all demonstrated something. They all came away with learning with something at the end of it. Whether they said that some of the language they already knew, or whether they didn't, whether they learned an awful lot about the LGBT community. I think it was the starting of a few sessions that we then ran about this topic, that, and I think that's how I would introduce that stretch and challenge, and how I would make things more difficult for them. It was much better than the one before, and I think that was because I felt much more comfortable in this environment, and this is where I know that my strengths lie, in this sort of informal environment.